The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
After all these years, it has finally been uncovered that indeed Bill Cosby has admitted to drugging women before having sex with them. By now, you've probably heard of all the allegations against Bill Cosby. Over the last year, we heard dozens of women come forward accusing the comedian, former star of The Cosby Show, of rape. This dates all the way back to when Bill Cosby was still on television, and the accusations are pretty similar in terms of the pattern. They start with an innocuous-looking little pill, and they end with allegations of sexual assault. And we now have, because of documents uncovered by the Associated Press, evidence that Bill Cosby testified in 2005 that indeed he did get Quaaludes with the intent of giving them to young women he wanted to have sex with, and he admitted to giving Quaaludes to at least one woman and, quote, other people, according to documents obtained yesterday by the AP. The AP went to court to compel the release of the documents. Bill Cosby's lawyers objected, saying these documents would embarrass our client, and indeed, it is quite embarrassing. The 77-year-old comedian was testifying under oath in a lawsuit that was filed by a former Temple University employee. He testified that he gave her 3 half pills of Benadryl. He eventually settled that sex abuse lawsuit for an undisclosed amount of money in 2006. More than 24 women, Lewis, and when we talked about this, the men's rights activists started saying to me, David, you're saying he's guilty without any actual trial. And I was very clear, Lewis, about my position. My position was not that Bill Cosby was legally guilty of what he had been accused of. Accusations alone are not evidence of legal guilt. Let me be very clear about that. What I did say was that in the sort of colloquial court of common sense, what is more realistic? That at least some of these allegations are probably true, or that there is a broad-reaching, decade-long conspiracy amongst women who have no connection to each other to concoct, at a time when this guy is almost 80 years old, lies. What would the point be? What is the simplest explanation? And now, indeed, Lewis, it turns out that yes, some of those allegations were true.
And for all we know, all of them were true, right? I mean, this is just a small part of it. And yes, I think it's insane to think that all of those women were colluding to do this to Bill Cosby. It really makes no sense. And so we thought, yes, considering the just sheer number of accusations, there's probably some truth to it. But we didn't say he was legally guilty.
And again, we are not saying accusations by themselves are evidence of legal guilt. We did not call for him to go to jail. It may be the case that the statute of limitations has expired on all of these cases. What we were saying was, it seems incredibly unlikely that these are all completely fabricated allegations. And indeed, by Bill Cosby's own admission in 2005, he did drug women and have sex with them, period, end of story. Does this really matter at this point for Bill Cosby?
Well, for Bill Cosby, maybe not. I think he was pretty much, because of this, he was pretty much all done anyway. But I mean, I'm glad that we actually got to find out about this, so that there's no doubt anymore.
Send me your thoughts about this. Are there still any defenders of Bill Cosby who say he never drugged any women and had sex with them and made these sexual advances? Send me your thoughts. How are you concocting that hypothesis? Let me know. Bernie Sanders had another huge political campaign rally last night. This one was in Portland, Maine, a city of only 66,000 residents, and 7,500 people packed in to hear Bernie Sanders speak. I've told you that in recent weeks, he drew a crowd of 10,000 people to Madison, Wisconsin, more than 5,000 to Denver, about 3,000 to Minneapolis, packed in Portland, only 66,000 residents and 7,500 people showing up for Bernie. He's filling huge venues. Let's check out a little bit of Bernie Sanders' speech and listen to the flavor and tone of that place.
In case you didn't notice, this is a big turnout. Let me thank Troy for that very generous introduction. Let me thank my wife, Jane, for walking me up here. But mostly, let me thank all of you for coming out tonight to have a serious discussion about the serious issues affecting our country.
He said yesterday, Bernie Sanders did, why he thinks people are showing up to his speeches. He said, quote, "The answer, I think, is pretty obvious. From Maine to California, the American people understand that establishment politics and establishment economics are not working for the middle class." He made a number of, I guess at this point, we're calling them campaign promises, which include raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour, making college tuition free, guaranteeing workers family leave, vacation time, and paid sick time, and funding it through higher taxes for corporations and the wealthy. We don't know how many of these things President Bernie Sanders could conceivably accomplish unless he had broad support from at least parts of both sides, the Republicans and the Democrats. And we also don't know how far he's going to go in this campaign, Lewis, but he is turning out some impressive crowds.
Yeah, the crowds alone give me hope that he can get people to the polls voting for him, and that maybe he can beat Hillary. It's just all about word of mouth, really, at this point.
We're going to talk later today with Bill Scher a little bit about Bernie Sanders, and I do think we know the data, right? Which is the candidate with more money tends to win, and Bernie Sanders says he's not doing the super PAC thing, and he's going to do this with small donations. From a merely logistical standpoint, aside from how strongly Bernie Sanders supporters might support him, I think that is ultimately going to be a problem for him, the money issue.
Yeah, I think it will be a problem. So the question is, can you win without being, having the most donations and having the largest pool of money? I really don't know. Probably not, but I hope so.
Let's talk a little bit about some of Bernie Sanders' positions. I've talked to you in the past about how, although Bernie Sanders is kind of framed as this far left, sometimes socialist, sometimes communist person by people who know very little about far left and about communism and about socialism, but be that as it may, we've talked about Bernie Sanders actually being the mainstream guy. And Salon has put together a really interesting article which just looks at 5 issues on which Bernie Sanders' supposed far-left views are actually the mainstream. One is healthcare for all. Bernie Sanders saying many times the U.S. is the only country on earth that doesn't guarantee healthcare to all its people as a right. Not exactly true, but certainly the I guess the exact quote is the only major country. If by that he means the only country at our level of development, then it would be true. In any case, that is a big yes to single-payer healthcare, healthcare for all. And when you look at, for example, the January 2015 poll that was done of Americans, a majority of Americans overall support the government providing some basic level of care to all people, regardless of ability to pay. This one we've talked about. Another one we've talked about is taxing the rich. Bernie Sanders has been very vocal about the massive transfer of wealth from the middle class to the top 1/10 of 1%. And he says we do need to have a higher top marginal tax rate. 64% of Americans say they are bothered a lot by the feeling that corporations and rich people aren't paying their fair share of taxes. 67% of Americans recently told Gallup they were dissatisfied with the way income and wealth are distributed. And a majority recently said they would be okay with taxing the richest Americans more in order to equalize the wealth gap that has developed. We've talked about Bernie and tuition-free college. He has proposed the College for All Act, 63% of respondents to a recent survey support a similar proposal from President Obama from earlier this year, including even 47% of Republicans. That was actually a surprisingly popular one, Lewis.
Yeah, I think it makes sense. I think people see that in other countries, this works. And, you know, at least to some extent, we should have free college.
Campaign finance reform, another issue that Bernie Sanders has been forcefully running against money in politics. 84% of recent poll respondents said money has too great of an influence on political campaigns. 66% agreed that the wealthy have the most influence. 77% want to limit the amount of money individuals can contribute to political campaigns, and 75% support public disclosure of campaign contributors. Bernie is the guy for all of those people. And lastly, same-sex marriage. And I bring this one up not because Bernie is the only guy supporting same-sex marriage, but because Bernie Sanders has been vocally supporting LGBT rights and same-sex marriage at minimum, at the sort of national stage, going all the way back to 1996. That is still essentially decades ahead of many Democratic politicians, and of course, many Republican politicians still haven't come around on that. So Bernie Sanders ahead of the curve on that one.
Yeah, Bernie Sanders seems to be the guy. Of course, I really like his views on campaign finance reform, something that we think is probably the biggest issue facing the country, because you need to address that before you can solve any of the other problems. So, yeah, we're rooting for Bernie.
And sadly, in spite of Bernie Sanders being the mainstream candidate, too many people don't realize that. But even more sad, too many people still don't even know who Bernie Sanders is. So there is certainly a name awareness program, a problem right now. And we'll see if Bernie Sanders can deal with that in the months to come. Twitter.com/David Pakman Show. Send me your thoughts on this. We'll be back right after a short break.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
Our program is funded directly by you, members of our audience, through the David Pakman Show membership program at davidpakman.com/membership. We produce this show every single day, mostly because of the support of the membership program. That is really what is paying the bills at the David Pakman Show. So consider joining today's new member of the day, who is Karen Jenkins. As a David Pakman Show member, Karen gets all the great member benefits, including, of course, the bonus show, commercial-free audio and video streams of the show, the archive of David Pakman shows dating all the way back to 2005, and Karen Jenkins, as a David Pakman Show member, gets invited to our quarterly town hall meetings with Lewis and with me, where the members can ask us any questions they like. davidpakman.com/membership. Lewis, let's do a quick update on the fundraising campaign. We are trying to reach the $50,000 goal within 50 days at davidpakman.com/donate. The immediate threshold we are looking to pass is $30,000. We have over 530 donors so far. And looking at the calendar, we have exactly 2 weeks left in this campaign. We really need your help to help us make it there. Is the David Pakman Show important to you? Are you satisfied with what corporate media is putting out there? If you're not satisfied with corporate media, help to expand the programming offerings of this show, the David Pakman Show, which is exactly what we plan to do with the money we are raising. This includes hiring an additional guest host to start working on investigative content, which corporate media does not want to do. It will also allow for more content to be produced on a regular basis. And when we have a summer vacation, for example, like the one that is coming up next week, instead of the show going dark while we are gone, we would be able to continue with new programming. These are only some of the things we are looking to do as part of this fundraiser. $50,000 in 50 days is the goal. Help us expand what we are doing, or don't, if you want us to go away, which I know is what the trolls want, Lewis, and we are doing everything we can to prevent that from happening.
if you want to help, counteract the trolls, then consider a contribution.
davidpakman.com/donate. We've gotten to 5 days a week and 150,000 YouTube subscribers and 185 radio and TV stations because of the support of our members. And if we are indeed to succeed with new programming, investigative journalism, the new studio, etc., it will also be because of our audience. Go to davidpakman.com/donate today. Help us get there. I would love to report more good news on the program tomorrow about where we are in this campaign. Hey, the entire Donald Trump thing is completely falling apart. You'll remember at his campaign announcement rally, Donald Trump said very negative things about Mexican immigrants, saying that they're rapists, and he assumes some of them are probably good people, although didn't seem too eager to say he'd ever met one of them. Yesterday, we told you that it turns out Donald Trump's signature menswear line is manufactured in Mexico. And now we are even further down the hypocrisy train, which seems to only be accelerating. The Washington Post found undocumented immigrants working at a Donald Trump hotel construction project in Washington, D.C. These workers know about Donald Trump's comments, calling them illegal immigrant rapists and murderers. They don't appreciate them. One worker from El Salvador said to the Washington Post, "Do you think that when we're hanging out there from the 8th floor that we're raping or selling drugs? We're risking our lives and our health. A lot of the chemicals we deal with are toxic." Washington Post reported that some of the workers had been naturalized, but many had not. Several of the men, who hail mostly from El Salvador, Honduras, and Guatemala, have earned U.S. citizenship or legal status through immigration programs targeting Central Americans fleeing civil wars or natural disasters. Others quietly acknowledged that they remain in the country illegally. Trump's spokespeople said he obeys all hiring laws, but then his attorneys quickly said, oh, the blame for the undocumented workers is on the contractors that are working for us, not on our company. I thought the Republican Party was the party of personal responsibility. I thought Donald Trump was the one who wanted to make sure that we are not hiring undocumented immigrants and talking about how these Central and South American immigrants are rapists and bad people. Turns out his suits are made in Mexico. Well, maybe not his personal suits, at least the ones he was selling at Macy's. And he has undocumented immigrants illegally working for him in Washington, D.C.
Yeah, I wonder if you looked at his personal suits, if they were made in America. Probably not. They were probably made in Italy. But yes, I think that if people find out about this, I mean, how could he continue to be even a number 2 in the polls with stories like this coming out?
If in another 2 weeks, Donald Trump is still polling as well as he's polling now, the Republican Party will be confirmed either completely ignorant or completely idiotic and immoral. That may not come as a surprise to a lot of our audience, but we will at least have some kind of more formal confirmation. You're absolutely right. How could anyone hear this and still say, you know, I think I want to support Donald Trump? Interestingly, I've talked about this guy that I sometimes see on the street who I don't know exactly what his status is, if he's homeless or not. And every once in a while, as I walk by, he yells something political. And I don't know if he recognizes me from the show or if he just says political stuff to every person who walks by. Yesterday, as I walked by him, Lewis, he said under his breath, "Donald Trump for president." And I looked back and he was just did not look as if he had said anything. And I'm now starting to think he actually does recognize me. And he's specifically telling me stuff about how he supports Trump.
Well, perhaps you need to confront him about this and ask him why he thinks Trump is so qualified to be president, right? I mean, maybe you can tell him about what we've been discussing here.
Certainly an idea. And by the way, we should follow up about Donald Trump's claims that it's these bad immigrants who are committing all of these crimes. He said, Donald Trump, at his campaign announcement, when Mexico sends its people, they're not sending their best. They're bringing drugs. They're bringing crime. They're rapists. This had huge repercussions. Univision and NBC severed ties with him. Macy's said it's dropping his line of clothing. Mattress maker Serta is not going to have Trump home products available anymore. But then we actually got an analysis of whether it's true that immigrants are bringing crime. Donald Trump had a session with the Chicago Tribune newspaper, and he brought them all sorts of newspaper articles that he thought would confirm his point about dangerous criminal immigrants. But it turns out that most of these are either completely out of context or just flat out untrue. The Huffington Post story that Donald Trump cited as evidence that immigrants are committing all this crime in the U.S. actually talked about how undocumented immigrants are often raped before crossing the border into the United States by individuals who are not in the United States. They get raped before they get here by bandits or human traffickers or government officials, etc. And then Donald Trump had other articles also, but they were just anecdotal. Out of any group of people, right, Episcopalians or people from West Virginia or people who like tennis, you're going to be able to find some criminals. That doesn't mean that it is representative of the population as a whole. Let's look, for example, at the city of El Paso, Texas, which in 2011 had the lowest crime rate ranking in any city with at least 500,000 residents. It is right across the river from Mexico, specifically Ciudad Juarez, which in Mexico in 2011 had the second highest murder rate of any city on earth. Lewis, just a river separating the two cities, and it doesn't seem like all this crime is bleeding over to El Paso.
Yeah, stories about illegals committing crime, we see this a lot. It's just a lot of irresponsible reporting. You point to one incident of something, and the way in which you report on it makes it seem like it's an epidemic. And it's a problem.
And even more absurd is what Donald Trump tried to say about Chicago. Sociologist from Harvard, Robert Sampson, has researched Chicago a lot and actually found a lower rate of violence among Mexican Americans compared to both whites and blacks. And he says actually that increases in immigration and language diversity tend to coincide with reductions in homicide rates. And this is no coincidence, Lewis. If you have immigrants coming to the U.S., if they know that they're not authorized to be working, if they're undocumented, they're going to want to stay under the radar, not committing crimes. And number two, it stands to reason logically that anyone who goes through the expense and the risk, both in terms legally and in terms of violence, because of the violence that can happen in Mexico before you cross the border, if you're going to go through all of that to come to the U.S., are you going to jeopardize the entire thing with the possibility of deportation, prison, or both by committing crimes? It just doesn't make sense.
No, I wouldn't do that. You wouldn't do that. But Donald Trump probably thinks that these people aren't the smartest, or he's not the smartest and doesn't realize this. Now, if you want to talk about the smugglers, the drug smugglers, those, the coyotes, okay, clearly these people are up to no good and they might be committing some crimes. But yes, I would try to stay under the radar. Just
obvious. It's just a complete lack of reason, and Donald Trump doing it in the most offensive way possible. Let's take a break. Bill Scher will join me next.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
It's great to welcome Bill Scher onto the program once again. He's senior writer at Campaign for America's Future, contributing editor at Politico. And Bill recently wrote a piece called "Liberal Isn't a Bad Word Anymore," which is really interesting because we've seen over time, Bill, there was a period where there was a shift from using the term liberal to talking about progressive, because I guess some people thought it had less negative connotations attached to it. And now you're identifying that liberal is not really so bad anymore.
No, there's a lot of polling going back years about do you define yourself as liberal, moderate, or conservative. Gallup does it in a more refined way. They talk about economically liberal or socially liberal. There's as much polling about progressive because it hasn't been as commonplace.
Yeah.
But what we all know anecdotally ever since the horror of the 1988 election, where Mike Dukakis was beat upside the head with the L word over and over again, that there's been this gradual shift away from the L word to say progressive, and that in the theory that it has less baggage. But the fact of the matter is most Americans say in polls Barack Obama is liberal, and he has won 2 elections. That takes a lot of sting out of the word. You know, Republicans in the past 6 years were more apt to throw around the word socialist instead of liberal, thinking that would be more potent. But that didn't do the trick for them either. So now, when these poll questions get asked, you're seeing a bump up by about 4 points for the general term liberal. Gallup has pointed out that you have near majority of the Democratic Party say that they're both socially and economically liberal. It's not. So some people look at that and say, well, that's an increase, but it's still not the majority of the country. There's still more people who say they're conservative than liberal. You know, that's all technically true. But what's really critical is, how do moderates see liberals and how do moderates see conservatives? They're still the plurality. But I would argue you're seeing increasing overlap between liberal and moderate that I think is commensurate with a swelling of liberal pride. If liberals think it's okay to be liberal, then it's not as off-putting for moderates to say, okay, I agree with you on X, Y, and Z.
Well, and I want to get to the topic of the moderates, but there's one thing I was thinking of as I read your piece, which is there's sort of 2 issues that we may be well off decoupling in a sense. One is, are liberals more likely to identify as such now, and or is anybody more likely to be willing to identify as liberal? And question 2 is, have people moved to the left in terms of their opinions on issues, right? And we could see more people identifying as liberal without their views having changed necessarily, merely because of the connotations of the word.
Well, that has always been the argument of the left, one that I've subscribed to, that when you're polling the label, you're just polling the label. You're not polling the issues. So even when the L word was down, you could still point to lots of issue by issue polling and say, look, people want healthcare, people want education spending, people want to fund their infrastructure, people want more progressive taxation. So that was always in the mix. That's not all that new. What's new is that there is a bump up in comfort with the label itself. And I think that it should make it easier to push on some of the issue fronts as well.
And we've actually seen, even with the term socialist, which is a term that has been sort of aggressively painted as like, this is the worst possible label that you could have in American politics. Even that is actually polling, I wouldn't say incredibly well, but it's certainly doing quite a bit better than what it has been doing. And we've seen with the Bernie craze, the recent Bernie Sanders resurgence, and by that, of course, not on corporate media, but in independent media and amongst many progressives, we've seen that many of the ideas that Bernie Sanders espouses, criticized often under the label of socialism, are the actual mainstream ideas among Americans.
Well, yes, and I have a piece coming out in Politico soon about that point, although it's a cautionary piece because, yes, there is a Bernie surge. There are lots of things that he talks about that are in the mainstream of American political thought, as polls show. But there is a fine line between confidence and hubris. It would not be accurate to say that the entirety of the Bernie agenda is embraced by a majority of the country. He does have certain positions, single payer health care, having a top tax rate over 50%, that are not majority positions as it stands. Maybe they could be someday if they're articulated properly over time. But if the name of the game is Bernie winning today, probably those positions are going to keep him at a natural ceiling, which he's probably reaching about now in this initial surge.
Yeah, but there's one part, though, that I don't know that you're right about, which is, yes, if you ask people, do you support government-run single-payer healthcare, the poll numbers are not going to be that great. But there's a number of polls where if you say, do you believe the government has a responsibility to provide some basic level of care to everybody, regardless of ability to pay, which is essentially a very similar question, albeit framed differently, the support is well over 50% for that.
Well, that's the polling that single-payer advocates have long held to
Yeah.
say, look, that we can sell this. I think the evidence has shown that going from point A to point B is not so simple. Now, look, Bernie's out there. I mean, he's going to test the proposition. My cautionary tale, we'll find out if it's proven wrong or not. I would suggest that you look at recent liberal insurgencies that have worked, at least for a time, the two most recent being Howard Dean and Barack Obama.
Yeah.
They had to leaven where they were pushing the envelope with signals that they were not going to push the envelope on everything to go beyond just being the flavor of the month and actually become in the top tier. The one candidate you can look at that didn't have to do that was George McGovern back in 1972. There were some idiosyncrasies with that. One, he literally rewrote the rules of how delegates get picked, and the other candidates weren't hip to how those rules worked. So he exploited, the primaries and the caucuses in the way the other candidates didn't. And in fact, he actually got less primary votes than Hubert Humphrey did. It's because he had mastered the delegate counting game, is how he squeaked by. So that's one thing that's different. One thing that is not different with McGovern is that he raised a lot of money. He was not ashamed to hit up millionaire friends for big donations. Bernie is trying to, say money's the problem. I'm not going to have a super PAC. I'm not going to ask for giant donations. It's going to be strictly small dollar. McGovern, Howard Dean, Barack Obama did not do that.
Certainly not.
They played the money game and they won. Bernie's trying to do a lot in this campaign, and look, that may be fine as far as pushing the envelope and trying to introduce new issues into the debate. He probably needs to trim somewhere if he's actually going to be in the top tier and actually win some actual primaries.
So in the context of liberal being a bad word or not, and sort of what the associations are with that term, I'm curious to hear your thoughts of when we have someone like Bernie Sanders now, who at least so far is making some waves. How does that impact the sort of willingness to identify as being somewhere on that side? Because I could sort of imagine it going two ways in my mind. On the one hand, when you hear about Bernie, whose ideas I don't find to be extreme, but some are characterizing that way, you say, hey, most of the mainstream Democrats that are elected right now are really pretty moderate, right? So it might sort of take away some of the sting of saying, oh, I'm supporting a real liberal. They're mostly pretty moderate Democrats. The other way it could go is I'm not going to be involved with any side that even has someone like Bernie Sanders there. Which do you think is a more a realistic way that it could go in terms of evaluating Bernie's influence on the debate?
Oh, I think Bernie's entrance into the race is totally healthy for the Democratic Party. You're not seeing it cause a massive civil war. You're not seeing it make the party brand look unpalatable to the middle, because what Bernie is emphasizing in his race are things that are in the mainstream. He's not. I mean, he's going to push the boundary in other areas, but by and large, he is not saying let's have the government take over all the supermarkets. It's not that kind of socialism that he's pushing. Contrast that with the Republican Party; they are beside themselves, worried how Donald Trump is poisoning the whole Republican brand, because the leading lights of the party want to make a play for the Latino vote. They're hoping that not replicate having Mitt Romney have to embrace self-deportation to get the nomination. Trump gets in there and messes that whole game up. So, and you have other candidates in there like, Mike Huckabee and Rick Santorum, who say lots of crazy things all the time, and there's a risk how that colors the entire party. So, Bernie is talking about, bread and butter issues, and Hillary is going to lean his way on some things and cost some daylight in others, and it's all seen as a healthy, rich policy discussion, things that don't alienate the middle. That's not happening on the Republican side right now.
No question about that. Absolutely agree with you. We've been speaking with Bill Scher, senior writer at Campaign for America's Future, contributing editor at Politico, and we will keep an eye out for his upcoming cautionary Bernie Sanders piece. Thanks, Bill.
Thank you.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
For several years now, but especially after the recent Supreme Court ruling saying that state bans on same-sex marriage are unconstitutional, we've been hearing this theme from some on the right that Christianity is under attack, that it's going to be illegal to be Christian, that pastors are going to be tried for hate crimes, and they are really piling on this one. I have two clips for you. One is from Brian Fisher at the American Family Association's radio show. The other is from Bob Vander Plaats, head of the Family Leader. If you don't remember Bob Vander Plaats, he previously said that gay marriage and abortion will end God's blessing on the United States. And he had a really simple argument against gay marriage once, saying plainly, it's awful. It's awful. What a great argument against same-sex marriage. First, to Brian Fisher, who said that soon it will be against the law for Christians to hold public office. Let's take a look.
And you may think that I'm exaggerating, that I'm hyperbolizing. I assure you, ladies and gentlemen, that I am not, that this is the direction that we are headed. Unless preventive action is taken fairly soon, this is what's going to happen. And what is going to happen, ladies and gentlemen, it is before long going to become illegal for Christians to hold public office. I repeat myself, the day is coming when it will be against the law for Christians to hold public office. It will be against the law for Christians even to run for public office. If someone is a Christian and someone holds to biblical values on the issue of sexuality and marriage, he will be disqualified from public service. He will not be allowed to throw his hat into the ring. He will not be allowed to put his name on a ballot. He will not be allowed to serve in any kind of appointed capacity in government.
How could anyone ban a Christian from holding public office if their religion wasn't part of their campaign, which would be the ideal scenario? We just wouldn't know the religion of our elected officials. It wouldn't be a factor. And it would be impossible for banning someone for their religion, not to mention, Lewis, that the Constitution, which these guys on the right claim to love, the Constitution prevents a religious test for office, meaning you don't get disqualified for being an atheist, but you also don't get disqualified for being a member of any particular religion. You're not required to be religious. You're not required to be non-religious. That is it. Brian Fisher, very confused, and he actually looks kind of ill. I'm wondering if this entire Supreme Court thing has really got him feeling physically sick.
Well, you know, we know what type of person he is, and he appears to be really calm and collected when he's talking about this stuff. But perhaps it's tearing him up inside. And I mean, if he's stressed out, you know, it can wreak havoc on your body.
Certainly. And secondly, we go to Bob Vander Plaats, who says specific Bible verses might be illegal. They might be hate crimes.
What do we as Christians need to armor up with for the next fight in this pushing God out of society and telling him he's not welcome?
Well, first of all, I would say, you know, it's time to gird your loins. That comes right out of Scripture.
Yeah.
Because we are entering the era of when Jesus said in the Sermon on the Mount, when you are persecuted. He didn't say if. He said, when you are persecuted for righteousness' sake. And that's the realm we're going into right now. I mean, we see Christians overseas getting beheaded.
Oh.
But it's now coming right here to roost in our own country. And then I'd put on the spiritual armor. You know, put on the belt of truth. Put on the helmet of salvation. Put on the breastplate of righteousness. I mean, Ephesians tells you how to gird up, but stay in the Word, stay in prayer, and stay connected to a community of believers. Because community of believers will inspire one another on. You're stronger together than you are alone.
What's going to happen when a couple does to any church what they did to the Gertz house? What will happen in the legal system?
Well, I think what's going to happen is that you're going to see a civil rights code violation, and they're going to sue the church. For the people to believe that the churches are off ground, there's no way they'll get touched, that is absolute nonsense.
Yeah.
And Romans 1, Matthew 19, Mark 9, all that is going to be hate speech.
Lewis, how often have you girded your loins?
I usually try to once a week.
Yeah. And when you do that, do you also strap on a belt of truth?
like a proverbial belt of truth, or you
I have
mean
no,
like
I don't know what Bob Vanderplat's meant. I mean, listen, gird your loins, spirit armor, a belt of truth, his helmet of salvation, the breastplate of righteousness. How is this anything but completely unfettered mental illness?
it sounds like something out of some old school fantasy video game, a really cheesy one, might I add.
Yeah, I think I remember some of those items when I used to play Zelda.
Yeah, that's exactly what it sounds like. This is just it's just fear mongering. They're just trying to instill fear because they need to. They feel they need to. They feel threatened. Maybe they feel like they've been backed into a corner.
How powerful is your God if a few gay people can push him completely out of society for good? I don't get it. It doesn't sound like a very powerful God to me, but we'll see what happens, I guess, and see if I'm so curious what the next layer of fighting this is going to be from the right. Let's talk about Hawaii, which in the past couple of years has started to explore banning plastic bags. Actually, a lot of cities and towns have done this recently. Less than 1% of plastic bags are recycled, and it actually costs more to recycle a plastic bag than to create a new one. So Oahu, the most populous Hawaiian island, joined the other Hawaiian islands and has officially banned plastic and non-compostable bags from their stores. Starting tomorrow, Hawaii will be the first state in the nation to ban plastic bags. Now, according to Mashable, the ban contains some important exemptions that are worth looking at. Bags will still be allowed, plastic bags that is, to wrap fruits, vegetables, meat, fish, and take out home deliveries, but retailers caught violating the ban will face some pretty heavy penalties, anywhere from $100 to $1,000 a day. This is actually something that we need to think about pretty seriously. Not only does it cost more to recycle a plastic bag than it does to create a new one, plastic bags are a huge fossil fuel burden. They're made from fossil fuels, but they also require fossil fuel derived energy to make, and litter. Littered plastic is a huge problem for wildlife, for the environment. It releases toxins, it gets into waterways, and who knows how long it takes plastic bags to decompose. At this point, I don't even know. So this is a pretty worthwhile thing to look at.
This is wonderful. This needs to happen across the world. It's there's no reason to have plastic bags when you can have paper bags or just your own reusable bags. And I think we need to look at plastic bottles too. Let's use glass instead.
And we actually have some data about plastic bag bans. In Ireland in 2002, they put in place a plastic bag tax, and it has reportedly led to a 95% reduction in plastic bag litter. And a study by San Jose, California found that a 2011 ban instituted there led to a similar plastic litter reduction of about 89% in the storm drain system, 60% in creeks and rivers, and 59% in streets and neighborhoods. Every indication, Lewis, is that these bans do work.
They seem to work. The taxes seem to work, but I'd rather stick with a full, all-out ban.
Let's talk about voicemail. Our voicemail number is 219-2DavidP, and I received this voicemail this morning.
Hey, fellas. I was just going to say, one of the smartest men in human history had a head of hair that looked insane, and that was Albert Einstein. I think people should quit talking about Bernie Sanders' hair. It's absolutely ridiculous. I think it actually looks kind of cool. But also, if Warren comes in as his VP, I don't think that. I think pretty much the election's just about over. That's the dream team.
Yeah,
anyway.
I'm not totally sure about that. I don't know. I've said that I would love a Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren ticket personally. I don't know that that is going to be the end of the election, though. I think that that would be a ticket that would definitely have some uphill battles to face heading towards November of 2016. On today's bonus show, migrants flood a Greek island. We will tell you all about it. Pod hotel rooms on a cliff in Peru, and sneakers made from ocean waste. Speaking of plastic waste in our waterways, we will talk about sneakers made from ocean waste. Get access to the bonus show, davidpakman.com/membership. And if you would like a half-priced membership, donate any amount to our Indiegogo campaign, even just $1 at davidpakman.com/donate, and you will qualify for a half-price membership. You'll get information and a code to use to sign up within 24 hours of your donation. Talk to you then.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.